What is Application Programming Interface, also known as API? A formalized set of software calls and routines that can be referenced by an application program in order to access supporting system or network services. What is manual testing? It is a process carried by a testing team to find the defects and to confirm the application works as per the requirements. Testers manually execute test cases without using any automation tools. Testers play an important role as end user and verify all features of the application work as per requirements. What are the disadvantages of manual testing? Manual testing is slower than automation. Running tests manually can be very time consuming and requires more resources, and manual testing is prone to human errors. What is automated testing? Automated testing is performed by using tools which are capable of executing tests, reporting outcomes, and comparing results with earlier test runs. Tests carried out with automated tools can be run repeatedly at any time of the day without need of human being to be present. Automation is expensive initially, but eventually it is cost effective. What can be the limitations of automating software testing? It is not possible to do 100% automation of any application. Some part needs to be manually tested. Automation testing can't replace manual testing, as manual testing is done by human, and of course human intelligence cannot be replaced by machine at all levels, and we should be proud about it. Wherever there is a change in the user interface, most of the automated script needs changes in their code, and thus continuous update and maintenance is needed. Not all the tools support all kinds of testing. A few tools are specialized for user interface testing, few are for database testing, and few for web testing. And then there are others which are specialized for performance load testing. So it can be expensive to buy all those tools. It depends on the company budget and how big is the project. Let's move on to some database questions. What is a database? Database is an organized collection of data which provides efficient retrieval of the data. Let's move on to the next one. What is DBMS? DBMS is Database Management System. It is a system of systematic way of creating, storing, retrieving, and managing of data. The example of DBMS is a file system XML. What is RDBMS? Relational Database Management System. It's a database system based on relational model. Example, SQL Server, Oracle. What is database testing? Database testing is a process of testing the behavior of the database with reference to front end. It can be web or desktop application. And any changes made in the front end should reflect the back end, and any changes made in the back end should reflect the front end. Database testing also involves data integrity, data validity, database performance, testing of functions, procedures, and triggers. What do we need to check in database testing? Constraint check, verification of field size and type, stored procedures, triggers, performance-based issues. How do you test data integrity? And what do you take into consideration while verifying data integrity? Verify any of the CRUD, that is CRUD, C for create, R for retrieve, U for update, and D for delete. These are the four important operations. They should, when you conduct these operations, they should display the most recent value and status of the shared data on all the forms and screens. That is data consistency throughout the application. Verify blank values can be retrieved from the database. Verify each value is successfully saved to the database and truncation of strings and rounding of numerals occurs as per business requirement. And if there are no business requirement for truncation and rounding, then it should not occur. We need to test it. Verification of data compatibility against older version of hardware or operating system. Verify the data updated, modified, and deleted from the front end are reflected in the back end. How do you test data validity? Field level validation, form level validation, data saving validation, search criteria validation. How can you reduce data corruption which occurs by human errors? This is more for a developer question, but they can ask you if you're experienced software tester applying for a job with like 3 to 4 years experience. So the things which can minimize the data corruption caused by human errors can be range validation, lookup validation, like masking the input validation. How will you plan database performance testing? Set and define performance goals regarding load and response time. Define resources and build virtual machines to identify database behavior with different machine configurations. Create multiple virtual users to verify the response time for executing the transaction. Time taken by database to fetch specific records or number of records should be verified. Include editable transactions and non-editable transactions. In other words, editable are read and write and non-editable are read-only transactions. Design test cases to identify the system breakpoint. What will you consider while testing procedures? Relate to the business requirements, the procedures written or whatever you're going to test. Number of rows affected in the output, extracted records, what it is supposed to do and not supposed to do. Queries to test if a stored procedure is extracting the correct data. Parameter testing, check parameters if they are required. Call stored procedure with valid, invalid data and boundary data. Test return values when failure or success occurs. Validate the return values. Then testing the error messages, make stored procedure fail and check for error messages. Find out exceptions where stored procedures can fail. Name and explain database testing validation. We do data mapping and asset properties validation and business rule adherence while doing database testing validation. Under data mapping, data often travels back and forth from the backend database to the user interface and vice versa. To validate whether the fields in the user interface are mapped consistently with the corresponding database tables and also fields within the table. Whenever a certain action is performed in the front end, like the 4 important actions which I have mentioned, create, retrieve, update, and delete action, that should invoke also at the back end. So front end and back end, you should see both the actions, all the 4 actions at the both ends. Asset properties validation, atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability. Atomicity means that a transaction either fails or passes. There is nothing in between. If a transaction has multiple steps and any part of transaction fails, means that the entire transaction has failed. Consistency. A transaction either creates a new valid state of data or rolls back to the original state if any failure occurs. Isolation. A transaction in process and not committed should remain isolated from other transactions. Durability. Once a transaction is completed and committed, no external factors like power loss, technical failures like hardware crash, rebooting, networking issues should be able to change it. And under database testing validation, you make sure that it's validating according to the business rule adherence. What SQL statements have you used for database testing? Now, if your job is related to only data, like more towards database testing, then you need to know the SQL statements in details. And I'm going to do a separate video tutorial on database testing into like testing interview questions with SQL. But if you're just applying for a software testing interview and part of it is database testing, then they may ask you this question: what SQL statements have you used for database testing? DML, data manipulative language, which includes update, insert, delete, select, merge, call. DDL, data definition language, create, alter, drop, truncate, comment, rename. DCL, grant and revoke. TCL, rollback and commit. How do you test database manually? The 4 operations again: CRUD, create, retrieve, update and delete in the front-end application you perform, and verify that data is changed accordingly in the back-end. And that's how you do the database testing manually. How do you test triggers? By querying the common audit log where we can see trigger fired. What is data-driven testing? Data-driven testing is an automation testing which tests the output and or input values. These values are read directly from the data files rather than using hard-coded values. The data files can be Excel files, CSV files, text files, data pools, because they can ask you questions like what kind of files you have used for data-driven testing, and you should know which are the files available and which can be used.